if I take one of you and I put you in a radically new environment, new genes will turn on in your brain and code for new proteins. And so it's like you're sitting there, but in some sense there's a whole set of potential yous that are sitting there. And a lot of that potential is actually locked in the genetic code. I mean, it's dependent on the information that's in the environment around it, because it's not all in the code, but it's enough to get the process started. So if I take you out of situation A and put you in situation B, you build new brain structures at the micro level. So you're actually a different person. And, you know, that's a very interesting way of thinking about the consequences of something like exposure in psychotherapy. It's like, okay, you're all timid and there's 18 things you're terrified of. And so you go out and you master one of them. It's like, poof, your brain is not the same. So maybe now you're a little braver. And then, you know, you go master another one and a bunch more of you turns on. Now, I don't know if when one thing turns on, something else turns off. You know, if it's, you know, what I mean is that there's only so much of you that can be turned on at any one time. But maybe a lot more of you could be turned on than is turned on. So, and I think, you know, it looks like that because people who really challenge themselves across the span of their life, they develop talents in multiple directions. You know, people can really be amazingly good at a ridiculous number of things. So, okay, so Sokolov and Vinogradova showed that you model the world right down to the finest detail. But then Dan Simon and his crew showed that, no, you don't. You're so blind that you can't even believe it. It's like, okay, those are not the same set of facts. So how do we reconcile that? Okay, well, here's one way of getting a bit of a sense of it. Look straight ahead. Okay, now, concentrate not on what you see in the middle of your vision, but at the sides. It's probably better if you look at a person to do that. It doesn't really matter, though. So look at straight ahead, but pay attention to what you see in the periphery. Okay, so I can tell you what you'll see, because some of it's very difficult to detect. Way out in the periphery, it's black and white. You can't tell that, though. But we know that because if we change colors way out in the periphery on you, you can't detect the change. And then out to about here, if something isn't moving, it's almost impossible to see it. But as soon as it moves, you can see that there's something moving. Sort of like dinosaur vision. You remember Jurassic Park? Don't move because the dinosaur can see you. It's like, well, you have dinosaur movement detectors still built into your nervous system. And the question is why? And the answer is, well, if you can't afford to have a lot of your brain wired up to the periphery of your vision because your head is only so big, then you have to concentrate on detecting only those things that are most likely to be relevant. And moving things are more likely to be relevant because they can eat you. Moving things are more likely to be relevant than stationary things, especially if you've been in an environment for a while. Right? Because if you're in here, it's like, well, the stationary things are going to stay stationary, so you can ignore them. You don't even have to see them. But the moving things, well, they're transforming at a time rate that's relevant to you, and so it's good to be able to detect those. Now, the periphery of your vision is actually wired in more directly to the lower levels of your nervous system. So it can trigger off things like startle reflexes, which are very rapid. And it also triggers an orienting response, which is the movement of your sensory systems in the direction of the stimulus. So if something over here moves, then you go like that. And then what you're doing is you're nailing it with your central vision. Now, out in your peripheral vision, if you follow the optical track back to your brain, you'll see that the peripheral retinal nerves don't attach to a tremendous number of visual cortex neurons, but the central ones do. So each of the central neurons in your central vision, the fovea, each one of those is connected to 10,000 neurons at the first level of elaboration. And then each neuron is connected to about 10,000 other neurons. So it's 10,000 to the 10,000th, 2 neurons in. And so a lot of your brain is focusing on that tiny little pinpoint that you use that's foveal vision. And it seems to be about big enough so that you can bring a face into high resolution in the center, and you can track the movements of the various elements of the faces. If you look at someone and you look about 18 inches to their left or to the right, you'll see that you can't see their nose anymore. You see kind of a vague outline of their face. You can still see the color. You can detect their eyebrows, and you can detect their mouth, especially if their mouth moves or their eyes move. You just zero in on that right away. And again, so what's happening is that way out here, your vision is incredibly low resolution, and then the resolution increases to the center where it's very, very high. And then there's some tweaks, like, okay, you can't really see out here, but you can see motion. And that's good enough, because as soon as something moves, you can turn your head, because you can turn your head and your eyes, and then you can focus that little pinpoint on it and dance around, because that's what you do with the pinpoint. It moves around very rapidly. And then you can scan that central area with high resolution. And so it's an efficient use of limited resources. So partly the way that you manage in the world, which is very, very complicated, is that even your senses simplify it for you. You know, you can't see the entire spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. You can only see the visual light spectrum. It's very narrow. There's a whole range of sounds you can't hear. There's things you can't smell. So, you know, you're in a box and some things get through, but not everything. So that simplifies things for you right off the bat. And, you know, hypothetically, those things you do detect were those things that it was necessary for you to detect for you to be here over this vast span of time. And no doubt there were variants all the way through that tried to parse it up differently, slightly differently, and that didn't work out as well, so they aren't around. So you're around because of death and replication. So that, you know, it's an interesting take on death, eh? Because you're the product of an unbelievable number of deaths, right? Because all of those experiments had to take place in some sense for you to be here at all. So, anyways, okay. Then, so you can see with your central vision that you focus in on one point and then you reduce the others to low resolution representations, maybe even cartoons. And then I also think, although I don't know this for sure and someone has undoubtedly done the work, my suspicions is that in the periphery, you don't update, you know how your screen updates? It's 60 cycles a second, something like that. You update your vision at about 60 cycles per second. And we know that because if the screen resolution, or if the screen update decreases below 60 cycles a second, people can start to see it flicker. So we have a refresh rate, it's around 60 hertz. And some people can see flicker at higher hertz than that, but most people can't. 60 is about right. So that's another way that you deal with the fact that there's way too much for you to deal with. Your temporal resolution isn't very high. You know, so the smallest meaningful event for you is about 1/10 of a second long. Now, if you're in a car accident or you're in some situation where it's an emergency and you get a massive burst of dopamine, you might be able to speed that processing up by 100-fold. Who knows? But you're going to be absolutely exhausted instantly when you do that. I don't know if you've ever experienced that in a car accident or something like that, but people often report that time slows down dramatically, but then afterwards they're done. So the reason you don't see 1,000 times as fast as you do is because you'd have to be eating like a hummingbird, right? You need a big vat of nectar attached to you, and you'd be just sipping on it or gulping it down non-stop.